Hello, everyone, and welcome to the City of Derry International Choir Festival 2023, our 10th anniversary edition. When we started this wonderful venture as part of the City of Culture in 2013, little did we know that we'd be thriving and looking forward to another exciting 5 days of music making together in 2023. But the time has flown, and I'm happy to say that the festival has grown in those years as well. I remember in 2013, we started the very first festival with the symposium. So here we are 10 years later with the same format, but a very different feel to the festival in terms of where we're at, but also great similarities in terms of sharing and continuing to share the great joy of singing and music making that we have together. Again, our first theme was Make a Joyful Noise. This year, it's engagement, building social bonds and collective joy through singing. And I'm delighted to say that we have assembled a fantastic panel that's going to be chaired by Dr. Rob from the Ulster University, who will lead the discussion. And I now hand over to Rob to introduce you to the panel and to take the discussion forward.
Thank you, Donald, and welcome everyone. So I won't try to account for all the awards, accolades, and achievements of our panelists today in this introduction, as well, to be honest, that won't leave much time for discussion. So forgive me if I give quite a top-line biography, but I'm sure we'll get into more biographical detail as the discussion proceeds. So with us today, we have Lorenzo Donati, who is a highly respected Italian conductor and composer. He's an experienced juror at international choir festivals worldwide. He has won many national and international awards with his choir. Lorenzo teaches choral composition and conducting at the Conservatory of Venice. Bernie Sherlock is with us today too. She is an Irish choral conductor, adjudicator, teacher, and lecturer in music. She's no stranger, of course, to the City of Derry International Choral Festival. She has won numerous international awards for conducting and interpretation, as well as numerous first prizes with her chamber choir, New Dublin Voices. Bernie is also the artistic director of the Irish Youth Choir. Joe Michael Scheibe is a native of Southern California. He developed his love for music through singing in church in Westminster High School. Mike is best known for his role as chair of the Department of Choral and Sacred Music at the University of Southern California. He is in frequent demand internationally as a clinician, conductor, and adjudicator. Kari Turunen has been the artistic director of the Vancouver Chamber Choir since 2019. Before moving to Vancouver, he played a major role in choral music in Finland as a conductor, teacher of conducting, a singer, clinician, adjudicator, and lecturer. And the Swedish vocalist and arranger and composer Anders Edenroth is our final panel member. He studied at Adolf Fredrik School of Music in Stockholm, which does have a strong focus on choir singing. After that, he continued his studies at the Royal Academy of Music in Stockholm for 5 years, where he and his fellow students formed the remarkable a cappella quintet, the Real Group. So everyone, you're extremely welcome to today's panel, which, as Donald said, the theme of our discussion today is engagement, building social bonds and collective joy through singing. And of course, we invite questions from viewers also that we can put to the panel as the conversation proceeds. So, as I say, you're all very welcome. I'd like to start maybe just to kind of get a maybe a bit more of a sense of the biography and background of some of our panelists by considering the question about what brought you to your study of the voice. So each of you has dedicated your life to the voice, to singing, and I wonder what it is that drew you to that as your primary instrument, as a performer, conductor, educator, arranger, and commissioner of new music. Bernie, I wonder if we could go to you first. What drew you to the voice as your principal instrument?
Well, it's good to get me out of the way because mine was kind of accidental. Because I think about Anders and his work with the real group. So I loved singing. I sang in a choir at school. I studied music at college and just wanted to be a better music teacher. So I went to Hungary for 2 years and studied conducting and pedagogy there. And that was the aim, was to become a better classroom teacher. But then I guess the bug got me, and I started with very simple stuff with simple choirs, and it just gradually grew. I had 5 children in the meantime, so when they started to grow up, then I maybe became more involved. But yes, since that time, I've been absolutely drawn to it. I'm fascinated by it. I'm constantly moved by it. I'm constantly impressed by what other people can do with the voice in groups, the power of it, and the communication that you can get with an audience. And so I'm a choral nerd, but by a very kind of a slow, accidental route rather than something very amazing.
That's great. I believe that's interesting that you mentioned that you principally wanted to become a teacher when you started out at the beginning, and it sort of built from there. Like Scheibe, I believe that was kind of your route into choral singing also, that to begin with, you wanted to be a high school teacher, if I'm not mistaken, and teach choral singing in high schools, and you proceeded from there in your own career also.
Yeah, it has certainly been a ride for me. I think text is the key for me. That in my mind, text always engaged me, and how it's set in choral music. I was a clarinetist in elementary school because my parents were immigrants, and we didn't have the means to have a piano or piano lessons, but the school, actually, the parochial school I was going to, had the ability to take instrumental lessons. So I took clarinet and got into high school and engaged by a dynamic choral director named Philip Haynes at the high school, and went on to college and worked with this incredible choral director named Frank Pooler, who was at that time very involved in the Scandinavian choral scene, along with Knut Nystedt and Paul Solomonovich and a number of other individuals. And through that experience of especially doing new music, at that time, people unheard of, like Knut Nystedt and others, Sogadal and Janssen and people like that. It was just such a enlightening experience for me. And then I went to teach, and like Bernie, I just wanted to get better. I was a frustrated conductor because the choir just didn't reach everything I wanted to do with my hands. It was being done by words. And so I went and studied with a gentleman named Rod Eichenberger at USC. And 35 years later, I was teaching at that same institution, taking the chairmanship of the School of the Department of Choral and Sacred Music. So church has always been paramount in my life in some capacity. I've been blessed with great mentors. I've been able to watch over my career a change in what I see in the States as far as engagement of other communities. I believe that we sing from birth until death. And that is my goal, that I continue to make music with people who are maybe not as talented as some of the students I've had, but certainly are engaged, and it's a community for them, and it's a place for them to find a home, whether or not they're in their 20s, 40s, 60s, or 80s or 90s. So it is it's been a blessing. So that's kind of my lineage, if you will.
Yes, it's interesting that you, and I've heard you in an interview before, talk about how community was so important to you in growing up and participating in choirs in the high school, and that seems to be very much something that you've taken forward in your own practice. Anders, can I turn to you? I believe that for a number of the panelists, Swedish choral music and Scandinavian choral music more broadly has had an enormous influence on their development and on their imagination and the practice and upon their practice. Of course, you grew up within that tradition. Can you say something about your own experience in growing up in that tradition, and then how that sort of motivated you to pursue the voice and singing as your own career and life's work?
Of course, everybody would agree that Scandinavia, Sweden and Norway foremost, I would say, has had played an important role in the development of choral music internationally. I was, of course, fortunate to be at the Royal Academy of Music doing my master's degree 1984 to 1989, and then working closely together with Erik Erikson, which people would put in the very epicenter of this choral development. I didn't really reflect upon it at the time. Nowadays I wish I would have been more grateful, or even, you know, really, you know, showed my appreciation. I was playing jazz at the time and doing other stuff, and I was in the middle of a period in life where you don't really think of why you do things. You just do it because you love it. Music was a playground for me, and also social melting pot, meeting place, and a social melting pot in a way. So it was not until later in life that I sort of look in the rear view mirror and look back on what influence some of the great people of choral music in Sweden had on my choice of career. So it's, I mean, as many of you, I was put in a boys' choir when I was a kid by my mother. I don't know if it was because she wanted some hours off, somebody else looking after me, my brother. But I think she also is a very musical person. So I started singing and doing all these things for all the years of my life. Adolf Fredrik's School of Music, not to be underestimated. It was 1 hour of choral singing every day on a high level. And I never even thought of it as an education until later in life, where I realized that I actually was quite an accomplished choral singer. I was picked for the tenor part by Erik Erikson when I got to school, and I realized, oh yeah, maybe I can do this, you know. So, and we formed the real group. We could start on an extremely high level. The first rehearsals we did actually sounded really great, thanks to all the years at the same school. All the 5 of us came from that school. Yeah. So it's, but to get back to what I said, it was not a choice. It was something that I just enjoyed doing when I had dreams of becoming some kind of pop star or jazz musician, whatever was kind of my vision and my goal. Later on, I managed to combine the fact that I had the choral background with some kind of own platform that the real group became pretty quickly. I mean, after 5 years at the Academy, we were touring the world and had released 2 albums. So it was a very, very quick start for us. And you know, the jazz musician telephone nobody called me on that one, but they always called me on the real group telephone line. So that wasn't even a choice then. It sort of carried me off. So that's in short. It's not even short, but that was the long answer to even longer.
That you say that the jazz phone was not ringing. I was going to ask you what motivated you to, if you're coming at it as a jazz pianist, as somebody played jazz, or a jazz pianist or a pop keyboardist, what motivated you to take songs like from the Great American Songbook and arrange them for voice? Is that something that, you know, what was your motivation in doing that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, because I mean, I come across I always, when I tour outside Sweden, it's a comment, okay, you come from the, you know, the Erik Erikson heritage in Sweden and so on. That's so fantastic. And we can hear that in the real group sound. And, you know, in the beginning, that was an insult, because we did everything we possibly could not to sound like a Swedish choir. We wanted so much to sound like Manhattan Transfer or something really cool, American, jazzy. And obviously we didn't succeed fully, because we kept that Swedish choral identity that I think we took it for granted in a way. We couldn't see. I mean, the last thing a fish grows aware of is the water surrounding it, I guess. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but after a while, of course, we realized that this was a merge of our outside influence of jazz and pop and our upbringing within the choral community.
Of course, yeah, great. And Lorenzo, can I ask, I believe you are also very influenced by, and you've incorporated your influences from Swedish choral music, and I believe you studied Swedish choral music yourself also, and incorporate them, some of those ideas and traits into your own composition. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that and what motivated you to compose? I believe also you studied violin, but what motivated you to write and to dedicate much of your composition to the voice and to choral singing?
Yeah, thank you for this question. I started to study violin, but the first love of music started with I sang in a choir when a boy. In Italy, there are not a lot of good church choir. Normally, it's the liturgical very bad, but some experience like this are interesting to start to help to start the passion for music and for singing. After this experience, I started to study violin, and after composition. And in Arezzo, where I live, there are one of the most important foundations for choral music in Europe. We organized for 70 years the international competition. And when I was young, until 94 to 96, they organized with the European help academy for conductors. And in this academy, I studied with Gary Graden. And this is my connection with the Swedish tradition, because in this period, in the first part of 90, not only Gary, but also other great conductors, and the first before him, it's Erik Erikson. They start to win in all the competition in Europe, especially in Arezzo. Gary, he won in '89, but other conductors and from Norway, for example, Karl Yxet and other great choirs, they come in Italy. They comes in Italy and show this quality of sound, the quality of the Swedish choral music. Anders, he talk about this balance, this color of voice, this choice of repertoire. For example, not only ancient music, but also very interesting contemporary music. And after this period, when I studied with Gary Graden in Arezzo for 3 years, in the same period I studied composition, but in Italy, in conservatory, when we study composition, we study avant-garde technique, only avant-garde technique, very far to the choral music. It's very difficult in this European avant-garde technique to write for good choir or for amateur choir. is normally the Boulez or Berio or Ligeti technique. This is only 3 names. It's what they wrote very complex music for the voice, and the choral word normally need more, not simple, but more some technique more connected with the real possibility of the voice. And for this reason, when I studied with Kari, I visit Sweden. I listen a lot of contemporary Swedish and Nordic composition. For example, Sven David Stamström, Jennefelt, and other composer, or Trond Kverno from Norway, and after this Veljo Tormis and normally Arvo Pärt. And I decided to connect the style of my studies, my institutional studies in Italy, with this different sensibility of the vocal technique. For this reason, I changed in this period, in 96, 97, my not quality, but my direction of my composition. And for this reason, I think I'm not in the same direction of the Swedish or Nordic composer, but a lot of Italian conductors and composers receive a big help by the experience of the Nordic conductors and composers. And now our quality, our activities, our core activities, is more European, more modern, because for many years in Italy and also in the south of Europe, we have in our old vision of the choral process, and I think I'm very happy to have this possibility to connect with this great experience of the school of Erik Eriksson and the school of choral conductors of Sweden and Norway.
Very good, thank you. Speaking of the Nordic tradition, I suppose more broadly, and Finnish music more specifically, perhaps, Kari Turunen, you are now the director of Vancouver Chamber Choir. Do you find within your teaching and within your choral directing now that you're bringing something of that tradition to Vancouver, or to what degree, I suppose, are you bringing your own personal life experience and your own personal experience growing up within the choral tradition in Finland to your new role, or relatively new role, with the Vancouver Chamber Choir?
Yeah, it's fun listening to these. We're sort of the little brother who always flies under the radar. I'd probably say the Finnish contemporary music is, on the whole, at least as exciting as Sweden or Norway, but we seldom get mentioned. It's a little bit like, like the little brother, where compared to the big brother, of course, and we're very bitter about that, of course. But coming back to your question, yeah, definitely. I think to some extent, that's probably why they chose me as a conductor, that I bring another kind of tradition to the table. First, I tried to avoid, I don't want to sort of force feed everyone Finnish music, but I've loosened up a little bit there. Started adding more and more Nordic music, and on the whole, people love it, so it's no problem. But yeah, that's the tradition I grew up in. I think compared to, say, the traditions of Norway and Sweden, where I grew up, it was a little bit less sound oriented and much more musician oriented. So the contemporary, sort of the demanding contemporary, was really the norm for any good choirs. That's sort of the world I grew up in. But at the same time, I grew up listening to the Erik Eriksson recordings and that sound. And I'm really, really happy that pretty early on in the piece, I sort of thought that maybe the sound as such is not what you copy. maybe the process of singing is what you copy. And then when you have different singers from a different culture, it will sound different, but the method will be the same. So I think that has stood me in very good stead, you know, since my teenage years, I guess. So, yep, that's the tradition I come from.
Great, thank you. If we might sort of broaden out then, I suppose, and think about the question and the theme of today's discussion, engagement, building social bonds and collective joy through singing. Mike Scheibe, you mentioned community a number of times, I think, in your initial answer. And I know you've worked with community choirs. Community choirs are such a huge part of Derry, where the city of Derry, obviously, International Choral Festival is taking place, but a number of our students work with community choirs in the local region, oftentimes, and there's a very strong tradition, I think now we could call it, of community choirs in the area. What is it, maybe in your experience, or why do you continue to work and have devoted so much of your time and work with community choirs, and how do you see that in your own experience as building social bonds and joy through singing and participation in choirs?
Well, you know, it's an interesting process when you're working with a person who has less skill and you're dealing with vocalism. And you're still trying to build a sound, and you're trying to do it with kindness and trying to do it with joy. And so I see that as a mission, and it's also in church work, I think, very much the case. You can have a professional choir in a church, but it's not the same thing. They don't need the community, they're getting paid. But it's those that come to that with no grade, no responsibility to a degree, no responsibility to anything except themselves. I'm reminded, I had a meeting with a Fulbright officer here in Dublin a week ago, and Dara Fitzgerald and I were talking, and I said, "Have you ever sung?" And he said, "I've been singing in a choir for 17 years. I'm one of the tenors." And I said, "What brought you to that?" And he said, "Well, I always like to sing, and I'm in a community where people drive for 40 kilometers to get to rehearsal every Tuesday night." I think it was Tuesday night. And he said, after the first rehearsal, I was assured that I was never going to go back to that choir because the person next to me couldn't match pitch and was singing just totally wrong notes. And I said, "So what kept you going?" He said, "It's my community." I think that is really the gift that we have beyond, winning competitions or being in a professional choir. It is something that brings community. I see that Sean Doherty is in here as well, and I remember in Portugal, Lisbon, the World Choral Expo, he talked about a process that he was writing music for immigrants or migrants who were living in housing here in Dublin and needed to have music to bring them to some joy, because they were in a facility in a home where they had to write. He had a grant, I think, and Sean, I wish he would be able to unmute, but he talked about this, and it brought me back to what we are doing and what we're seeing in the United States, which is we're also dealing with people in prison, and we're doing prison choirs as a way of helping that process. We have homeless choirs in Dallas, especially. They're going to Carnegie Hall with these homeless choirs. That's a community. Those are people that are being fed by something other than a release or a entrance or intonation or some of those points which are so important to us as adjudicators. But it is an entire other side of our profession. Children's choirs are phenomenally successful in the United States right now. And part of that is because our educational system failed. And by nature, what happened is people then looked for opportunities for their students, not necessarily like Anders, whose mother stuck him in a choir so that she have some time off, but rather because that gives them some sort of discipline, some sort of athletic, if you will, idea of leadership. I think in so many ways, that community, and I'm seeing that as well. We're seeing African-American choirs, or we're seeing Latin American choirs, or we're seeing what happens when we go to Venezuela and we watch Maria Guinand and what she's done there in Caracas and with her choirs, and we're seeing that around the world. You know, I watch people struggling in Thailand trying to build a choral tradition. There are people that are really trying to make a difference in their own community. And this is my love. I mean, it's a passion for me. I'm working with Cor Fingal with 2 other conductors because I don't have a conductor here in Balbriggan. And I'm loving every minute of it because it challenges me to choose the right repertoire for the people sitting in front of me, and it's not about me. It has nothing to do about me. It has to do with them. They have a passion. I want to feed that passion. I want them to be in the audiences for us for the rest of our lives. As long as we're conducting, we need audiences. And those are people that have been inspired in some way by music or by the text or about the community that they're part of. I'm sorry, it's a passion. Sorry.
Not at all. Great, thanks. Would anybody like to come in there? Bernie, you run the youth choir. Have you any thoughts on anything that Mike has said?
I love what he said. It's wonderful, and it's what we all need to be. We need to have that passion to work with singers at whatever level, because my experience is very varied, from high level choirs to just community choirs who like to sing together. And I learned a lot from working with community choirs, because you actually have to work harder with singers who are less experienced. You have to find a way, and you do have to be inspiring, because they won't just stay with you just because they like to sing. It needs to be a little bit better than that. And I think that's our job as conductors, that we have to find a way to teach the music the way the composer wrote it, find the magic in the piece, and then bring it to them. Because the better level they get to in singing, the more they're going to love the singing, and the more their audience is going to think, oh, wow, I had no idea a choir could do that. So I suppose, I mean, the Irish Youth Choirs is a different animal in that it's selected singers from around the country. And it's quite intense. It happens, during the summer for 8 or 9 days, and then you present a concert. Whereas my own weekly choirs, New Dublin Voices, which would be, I think, a fairly high level choir, and then I've got a conservatoire choir, and they're quite different. So the conservatoire choir, the level of music I have to choose there is a little bit more simple, but also I need to be really careful how I choose that, because I want to engage them. I want them to learn. I want to know how to take them from level C to level D to level E the next year. And I lose my singers, they finish their degree and they're gone, which you would be very familiar with, Michael. And then yes, they're both different, because I meet the choir weekly, and you prepare for different things in a different way, and at the end of the day, you want your singers to have this joy, to feel what music can do, to experience art in a real way by being inside it, by doing it, as opposed to listening to it. And that's very powerful for everybody, whatever level it is, whether it's a large choral society of 120 people versus a small chamber choir, the real group, for example. They're very, very different things, but they're aiming for the same goal of experiencing music at as high a level as possible.
Yes, I really like that idea of being in it and doing it. It seems very evocative of what it means to be in a choir, that you're inside the music in an interesting way. I think, Anders, you want to come in there.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I realize now when I've heard a little bit from each one of you, I think in a way I have similar experience from choral music to many of you, but I also have quite a bit of a different experience since I went into a field with vocal music without the conductor. We left the traditional choral scene, and we did so in the mid-80s when most of, if you were singing in parts in Sweden, you were either a part of like a church choir or a voice choir, whatever, or you did perhaps some barbershop singing gospel a few occasions. But what we've seen since mid-80s is that I think in many ways, the choral world has grown larger and become more inclusive in a way that I really appreciate. It has opened up doors to people that probably never set foot in a choir or wanted to, because it opened up to other styles of music. The Real Group is just one of them, going into the vocal jazz. It has exploded since we started, especially in US. I would be perhaps the best example. But also, I mean, it can take so many forms today, and many of them are autonomous and perhaps not the traditional way of having a composer doing a work of music with a conductor sort of leading the choir. I remember some years ago I met with a vocal group in Austria. They three people came up to me and said, "Hey, yeah, we have a vocal group and we are admirers of the Real Group." So okay, so I asked, "So where are the rest of your group?" "No, it's only the three of us." "Okay, so what style of music do you sing on only three people?" "Well, actually, we don't sing that much. I'm the beatboxer, so I do beatboxing, and this guy here, he's the MC, so he can't sing at all. So he's just rapping or talking to the audience. And then we have the girl here, she actually sings." So there was a vocal group of three people with only one people singing in a traditional way. And I said, yeah, this is sort of what is going to happen. It's going to spread and sprout in a way that we cannot expect, we can't control. We just need to welcome it in a great way. So, yeah. Thanks.
Fantastic. This idea of inclusivity or diversity, I wonder, this maybe Kari, I was looking through your program for the coming season, and there seems an extraordinarily diverse selection of works that runs across centuries, from Renaissance music to contemporary music. When you are programming your season, do you think about these issues of diversity and inclusivity and how you go about selecting your works?
Well, I work in Canada. It's unavoidable. You know, that's not saying it sort of just comes from the outside, but it just, you know, I think the US is often called a melting pot, i.e., you know, you put different people in and something American comes out. The Canadian landscape is a bit different. It's often compared to a quilt. So it's all these different cultures coming together to form Canada. And, you know, if you didn't go for a fairly diverse kind of approach, then you'd be neglecting where you are. And, you know, just representing a very slim portion of Canada. Maybe you know, you look at choral music, it is the dominant history. But nowadays, the musical scene is incredibly vibrant and diverse. So yes, things like when I talk about contemporary music, I try to keep men's and women's voices about balanced. So about half the music is written by women. That's maybe a little bit optimistic, but that's sort of the aim. And then just the different styles, indigenous. We've got so many cultures that come from around the world where there are strong choral traditions, like say the Korean tradition. So you have to sort of keep an eye on all of that, not just to be, representative, but just to be relevant in the community. And it's also a lot of fun. I mean, because we're professional, we get to sing a lot of works per year. So it's not, you're not choosing 15 pieces for the year and you're stuck with that. You're talking more about 150 pieces. So you've got a lot of room to play with different things. But it is definitely, one of the great delights of my job, I feel.
Yeah, I saw, I think one of the concerts that you're doing is a concert of Indigenous choral music, I think, coming up. Is that something that was, I suppose, new to you coming to Vancouver from Finland, or is that something that you were cognizant of, a tradition you were cognizant of before you started?
Completely out of the blue. But on that, you've got to remember the Canadian music on the whole travels really badly. People don't know it. I didn't know when I went there. I mean, I knew 3 composers or something like that. And then, of course, the Indigenous is a subset of that. And that means you really don't get to be exposed to it too much when you're outside of Canada. But it is a very strongly growing area. It's only a few composers at the moment, but especially I think the name Andrew Balfour is worth having a look at. He's a very skilled composer. So it's sort of a nice, as he says, he doesn't write Indigenous music. He is an Indigenous composer who writes music, often from the themes and the texts of those cultures. I mean, there are 150 Indigenous languages in Canada, so it's an incredibly sort of diverse world in itself. But it's been real fun to be exposed to that, and every time you get a new piece from that world, it's sort of it's always a new story and a new adventure, and I think both audiences and the performers love that.
Yes, and I watched a performance you did of the work by Peter Hannon, a piece that addresses, I suppose, sociocultural and political issues within the text. One of them being atrocities visited upon missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Is that something that you feel there's an onus on you as a choral director to program music that does have socio-political messages within it, or is it the work that drew you to the piece in the first place, the music, the writing, or how do you approach these kinds of questions as a choral director?
That's an incredibly relevant question, because on one side, you don't want to diminish your art into politics. That's just, you're sort of shooting yourself in the leg. But at the same time, the word I use a lot is relevant. Does what we do have relevance in this world? The Hannon was a really good example where it wasn't really my hand in play. It was a commissioned piece, and the guy wrote this thing. And I think that's the greatest way to become, I in a way become a little bit like someone who goes to an art gallery, that I come across art that I wasn't expecting, and it's going to evoke thoughts in me. But that's when people write new music for you, you don't often master what they're going to write about and how. So I think I think the art gallery simile isn't bad. And I think that's what I think a little bit with audiences as well, that they come into an art gallery when they come into a concert, and it's not going to be exactly what they're looking for, but hopefully it will evoke something in them, and they will leave thinking, well, I wasn't expecting this, but that was cool.
Great. And there's I think Anders was asking for the name of the Canadian composer you mentioned, Andrew Balfour, just a moment ago. Lorenzo, this question of diversity and opening up choral music, I suppose, to people across different ages and backgrounds, and as Mike Scheibe mentioned, and as Bernie was talking about with our youth choirs, you write for choirs of all different kinds of standards and age groups yourself as a composer. Why is it that you choose to do that in your work? I wonder, is this something that, well, I won't presume to answer the question. I'll leave you do it.
Well, we when we write a new composition, normally we can sometimes we know who go to sing this music, and maybe you know very well the choir or the vocal ensemble, and you maybe sometimes the composer knows they know if there are some problem in this choir, for example, no good sopranos, no good tenors, or maybe if there are some very good solo or some very good section, or maybe the numbers is very important, or not only the age, but also sometimes we in the professional groups, normally you can write what you want, because if you want 3 solo sopranos, you can ask, but maybe for the amateur choirs, sometimes you need to know if they have 6 sopranos and 3 altos, or maybe 12 sopranos and 4 basses. And for sometimes the good composer, they can choose a good texture of the sound in relation of the sound of this choir, of the experience. Maybe you can help to jump in another level. Maybe sometimes you can talk, you can organize with the conductor of the choir some process to help the choir to maybe to have a step to be better, but sometimes you are also free to write what you want. This depends of the relation with the commission, and also the relation with your idea. But I'm very interested because I want to connect my vision with the Anders ideas about what is choral music, because this is very, very interesting for in this period and in this last century. We start to think about choral music. What is choral music? Choral music is not only a choir. Choral music is also 3 people. In Slovenia, they said 3 people together is a choir. And also the new opportunities of the composer give the possibility to have very good choral music, but maybe with different sounds. For example, there are only speaking voice choirs, speaking voice production, like Rautavaara or like Karl Orff. We can choose music for maybe 1 bass and female choir, or 1 instrument and choir. There are some tradition of folk music now. We can add color of these sounds. For example, in Sardinia they have the traditional with only 4 people, tenores. The names of this kind of choirs is tenores, because 3 people sing 1 pedal, 3 different notes, the fundamental and the fifth, and another voice sing a melody. This is the very old tradition, and to write and to connect different experience. We have the experience. We know the experience of Murray Schaffer from Canada, of all the new graphic.
Yes, I think your connection is breaking up a little bit there, Lorenzo.
Musical scores. This is very interesting. This yeah.
Apologies, your connection is breaking up there a little bit. I think you were talking about our Murray Schafer there a moment ago. I wonder, Kari, I know you've performed some of our Murray Schafer's graphic works. Would you have anything to add to this idea, I suppose, about diversifying what choral music is and how those works maybe contribute to that diversity, or the diversity of approaches, and adding electronics or whatever it happens to be? How have you found choirs respond to those works, those graphic scores, I suppose?
I think there's an interesting dynamic there. That's often I've felt that good amateur choirs are actually much better at scores like that, because for the professionals choral singer, they're trained, like fighter pilots to do a very specific thing. Classically trained singers, that it's there's a lot of time spent to achieve that skill set, and then they're asked to do all sorts of things which are not in the skill set that they've been trained to do. And I sometimes feel that non-professionals sort of jump at that possibility with a lot more eagerness than professionals do. And I think in that sense, I'd sort of encourage everyone to have a go at scores like that. They're terrifying to begin with because you don't really know what they're going to sound like when you look at the paper. But that's part of the charm, that you're actually creating something new. And quite often in those pieces, there's a level of aleatorics. So it's not going to be the same for any choir. And I think it was something that was very popular in the 80s, but then it sort of faded away. But I feel there's a bit more of it coming back now, which I think is fun. The results are not always going to be great, but that's the truth with all music. But I think there's that element of playfulness, which I find is really key in choral work on the whole. It's like children playing. Kids play. It's serious. It's all out. When they play, they don't sort of muck about. They play, and then when the game is over, it's over. Or like sports, I'm a bit of a sports freak. So, the fact that you want to kill the opposition, but then after the game, you shake hands and hug. And I think some of that I try to get into choral singing, that it's just this joyful human endeavor that you sort of throw yourself into and you really go for it. It goes well, it goes badly, but you really go for it. You put everything into it. And then when it's over, you smile. And so I think a lot of the non-traditional scores sometimes liberate people to look at this side when they're not so hung up on listening to a million things, which is the thing that is really demanding in choral singing, that you have to actively compare pitches, rhythms, phrasings, dynamics. So there's a lot eating up, but in some of the less traditional scores, some of that goes away, and a lot of just the expression becomes the focus. And I think that is very liberating, and I sort of warmly recommend it. With Schafer, my choir has done it so much that I almost try to avoid it. but they're changing. So the generation is changing. Well, maybe we'll come back to that a little bit more, because there's some wonderful music in that oeuvre.
This is the point you made about joy, and I suppose liberating the singers, and it's something I suppose we'd be conscious of with students, that oftentimes performance is caught up with the extreme amounts of anxiety and pressure. And I wonder, does anybody have any thoughts about how to retain this idea of joy within performance when you're teaching your students?
If I can just quickly continue.
Yes.
I've tried to propagate this thought of that. Don't really aim for a brilliant choir, aim for a happy choir. The results will come, because the happiness is in the process. not really the result. And I think as long as we're really result oriented, we tend to sort of accept a lot of misery in the process. There's some every time because it's hard, it's demanding. People, it doesn't feel good, but there should be a great amount of joy in the process. And if there is, the results tend to be good.
Very good. Bernie, how do you find that and retaining this sense of joy? I know Sean Doherty sings in your choir. Maybe he has views on this, but if he's still with us, but how do you ensure this this feeling of joy and happiness within your groups, I suppose, as a choral conductor?
I actually do think programming is a huge part of it, that it needs to have variety. Like I need that myself as an audience member. I need that as a conductor. I think choirs need to develop in all kinds of different ways, whether it's for making non-vocal sounds or doing particular actions, which is now much more important in choral singing than it has been in the past. We used to be all very traditional, you just stand in formation and sing, whereas now choirs are much freer. They move a lot more easily. They perform pieces that involve very specific movements, sometimes very difficult movements, difficult choreographies, and performing music with electronics in the background or a different instrument. I'm myself a fan of variety, and I like choirs to do older music because I think they learn the most from the older music, polyphonic music. And then I love contemporary music. I love exploring the world of contemporary music, and my singers do too. It's not just me. It's not Bernie just wants to do new music. No, the singers love getting a piece that nobody has ever performed before and figuring out how best to do that. And yes, of course, there are going to be anxious times, sometimes coming up to a performance. But that's part of performance, you know, the preparation and trying to find the best way to do it. And that I hope Sean is there, he sings in my choir, that I try to involve my singers as well in that, because sometimes they come up with the most amazing ideas for how a piece will work better, be it a musical thing or a movement thing, a choreography thing, or even pronunciation, or as simple as somebody wearing something specific in a particular piece that has a story. So I mean, choral singing, it's no longer, it used to be, I think in the past, the dictator conductor. I think that's very different now. I think, yes, of course, it's good if a conductor is a good musician and knowledgeable and has good ideas on interpretation and how to program well. But basically, it kind of goes back to this word of community. That every group of singers, even the professional singers, they're a community of people working together towards a performance. So yes, they treat it differently to amateur singers, but it's still going towards, you want to be able to perform, and maybe that performance is a very casual performance, maybe it's a very high-powered one in a very large concert hall, but it's the same thing. The journey of learning all this amazing music, because the world is just exploding with amazing music, and we get to touch a tiny little bit of it in our lifetimes, and our singers the same. And what a joy that is for the singers to find music. Sometimes they think, nah, I don't really like that. I have to do that now. I don't like that piece. Don't like how it sounds. But then they like something else. Nobody will ever like all the same things. And I just myself, I'm fascinated with the variety of music that's there, the variety of types of choirs, the variety of types of conductors. And I hope I bring my singers with me in the joy of that, of exploring this amazing world of choral nerd music.
And of course, Sean would be writing sometimes pieces for your group also. So that must be an interesting dynamic there when you have people within the choir writing new music for that specific group of people. Anders, I wonder, I suppose with the real group, you know, a smaller group of people over a longer duration or over a duration of time, how do you retain, I suppose, the social cohesion and the bonds and the joy through with a small group like that, which you've got quite a intensive relationship, I'd imagine, with?
Yeah. How many hours do I have to reply? I think early on we realized that we were not colleagues or friends. We rather formed some kind of family situation, and in that in the way that, I mean, we became so close to each other, and we needed to be that close to each other to work with the music, that we also, like you do in families, you can really argue with your siblings a lot, and still they know that you love them. There is this secure a secure platform for this, and I think it's also annoying, of course, because maybe sometimes we ended up in other groups where we invited people in, and all of a sudden the atmosphere became so much more friendly and nice and harmonious than when we're only the five of us, because it was very much like a family situation. But also, if two of us would have a problem with each other, or we were arguing, there were always three other people that could step in and be some kind of mediators or just soften things up. So there was it was a good school also for how to interact. I mean, I was only 21 when we started. Margareta was 18 when we started the group. So we also, of course, had a parallel development into adults, which still continues, I'm sure. But it's I think it was a miniature choir in the sense that we had a loyalty situation, that if one of us showed up on rehearsal and hadn't looked at his part, or done some, practicing in advance, the four of us had to wait for this person to catch up. And that was not a very nice thing. So, and we realized that the link will never be stronger than the chain will not be stronger than the weakest link. So with that in mind, we couldn't pressure each other. It was more like an ongoing compromise that we said, well, this singer has a lot to do or some problems in his or her life right now, so we'll not put that much pressure. We'll take some of the responsibility off her shoulders. And I think in a larger choir that would be the same case, at least if you work on a regular basis. And even so in the professional field, the professional choirs, I'm sure there is a certain amount of this, even if they do get paid for what they're doing. They need to create a system of loyalty to each other and to art itself. And I think we probably already knew this when we entered the field, but it grew obvious because we had like somewhere around between 1,800 concerts a year all over the world for so many years. So we had to have a good dialogue. Sometimes it was not very good. We had, part of the journey was not very pleasant because we had friction, too much friction, usually between like two members. And they could be different, not always the same two. But and then as soon as we stepped up on stage, we cleared the area from any whatever fights we had before, and music took the leading role and got in charge. And so we could, and then after the concert, we could, it felt quite a bit better, but we probably picked up the fight later on anyhow, wherever we were. But I think that safe environment, I think, Kari, you were talking about joy. You can't feel joy with your fellow singers unless you also provide the possibility that you can argue with your fellow singers. It has to contain the span of the negative and the positive in order for people to dare to speak up and share their views and their artistry. So, I mean, that was as I said, I could speak forever about things like this, but it's the family/choir book. I will write it one day,
Great, thank you. Mike Scheibe, I wonder, have you any thoughts on this idea of retaining or promoting these concepts of joy and cohesion within the groups that you teach? Is that something that you find comes naturally with participation within a choir, or is it something that you as a choir director have to help cultivate and nurture in your groups?
Depending on the group, I think you have to make, you definitely, it depends on the group. I really think that, for instance, if you're working with a high level ensemble, there's going to be friction. And sometimes it can be artistic differences, even with your singers as a conductor. You may have an interpretation in your mind, they see it in a different way. I keep thinking of a piece last year or 2 years ago, where I was conducting and I'd put it into macrometer, and the students wanted it in the singers in this high level group wanted it in a certain way. And I said, no, this is the way I see the score and my reasoning. But there was always this give and take. In the end, it worked out that what I had chosen worked out, and they got it. But I think you treat each group differently based upon the personalities. Some years you'll have a group, especially like Bernie was saying, where, when you have a group that keeps changing year after year, I would say that probably most years in the last 15 years, the chamber singers at SC would change over at least 2/3 every year. So you would have maybe 8 of the 32 in the group back, and the rest would change out. Well, depending on how that personnel change happens, that would determine some of the direction the ensemble would take. Some years, I think some of our busiest years were some of our best years. I'm thinking of a year where we did, considering Matthew Shepard, surrounded a week prior and a week after with 2 Beethoven 9s with 2 different orchestras. And then we were still learning a program that took us to the Baltics and Poland in all these languages. And all of that happened within the span of basically 2 months. And this is a collegiate group that met 2 hours a week, or twice a week for 2 hours. So it was high level. But I would never say that group's personality ever got cantankerous, despite all the rehearsal time needed. However, I think when I work with a community group, my attention, or a church group, or a group less skilled, is very different. Bernie when Bernie was talking about, we only meet once a week, that's already a tough call, and your 2-hour time goes very quickly. So planning for me is the biggest part of it, and then being able to deviate from it. Anders said something, maybe it was Kari, who talked about the process, not the product. And I think that to me has been the goal. And depending upon the makeup of your ensemble, you've got to remember that. And not every concert's going to be stellar with a community group, not even with a collegiate group. There are going to be things that don't go as well. And for me as a conductor, I think there's so much rep out there that I want to do. And sometimes I have a box in my office that said, before I die. And that was a box of literature that I wanted to do before I pass away from this earth, because it's stuff that I have my hands on. I want to do it, but I've never had the group to do it. So I think that's an important part for me, for my own inspiration. But I also have, I wanted to point this out, Kari, when you were talking about the quilt, I love that idea of a quilt of Canada. I remember pulling out a piece of music a couple of years ago, Huron Carol, by Sarah Quartel, a fabulous piece. And I had a couple students come up to me and say, we can't do this piece. And I said, why is that? And it's an indigenous tune set by a white woman in this case, that I could not find the words to say how to program that piece. Because while I love the setting, in my current situation at my school, that would not go well because it was taken from the indigenous people without permission. So I am constantly learning, and I think we all are. The landscape in the United States right now is changing, and it's fraught with wonderful opportunities, and sometimes with a couple little issues in terms of minefields that you have to be careful how to deal with. Kari, you're smiling. You know what I'm talking about. It is tough. When you said you had 50% of your programming as female composers, I love that idea, because today I responded to a thread on Facebook this morning early to talk about, somebody wanted to know composers, female composers for their collegiate ensemble. There's a Facebook page. And I just started listing all of these female composers. And then I looked up and there were, 238 responses. I'm here in Ireland right now, and I'm trying to get a list, and maybe Bernie, you can help me with this, of female composers besides Rona Clark that I can name off, because I programmed here for a concert with more female composers than I've seen on any program of female composers that are from Ireland of any type. So I'm trying to discover in Ireland the female composers, because I'm looking at it through my lens of the US. And it's a hard lens to look at and to balance. I'm sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but this is kind of where I'm at this point, because I think we're in a wonderful period of exploration and rethinking our craft. And how do we deliver that to our audiences? And in the United States, that means that we're exploring a lot of contemporary composers, because you have Rena Ishmael and Dale Trombore, and we can just go down the list of all these wonderful composers out there that are female, and we want to make sure that we're embracing them. But the balance, of course, is what about the rest of the repertoire? And this is what I got probably from Frank Pooler back in 1968, the first time we pulled out a piece that was avant-garde, and it was back that far. It was 1968, the first piece that I remember singing that was avant-garde. So I'll just hush at this point, but I love this discussion. This is just so interesting to me. I'm making all sorts of notes. So thank you for this discussion.
Thank you. Bernie, do you want to, Anders is going to come in, but Bernie, do you want to come in on anything that Mike was saying just now?
Well, just on the female composer thing, it's not easy. It really isn't, because we all see what has happened in history, but it's difficult to do. And I mean, recently in New Dublin Voices, we commissioned 6 female composers to write pieces on texts by female poets. And that was, from our point of view, was very successful. But in the normal everyday programming of concerts, you program a concert and then you think, oh my goodness, they're all white men, even contemporary, and it's our obligation. We have to try to find more. We have to encourage more younger female composers. We have to encourage them to see that it's something they can do. And for me in Ireland, it's more about that I think we as a people don't feel very confident. We don't feel we can do things. And that's how we educate our our young composers, that they need to see, yes, I can do this. Actually, I can do this very well. Why am I not doing it? And then in the same way as you can say engineers, they don't choose engineering, but they can do it just as well. So it's a real responsibility, and it's very difficult. I'm happy to help you with other suggestions, Mike, but it's not, it's something I have to work on continuously all the time. It's there, that challenge. And the same with, like Kari's talking about, that we don't have the same issues in terms of Indigenous peoples. But I'm very impressed with how I've seen the United States and Canada manage that situation. In concerts I've gone to, in how Indigenous composers are spoken about and how it's programmed, that really is something wonderful. And if we could do the same with female composers, I'd be very happy if we could get to a stage where young musicians think, yes, I can do that.
Anders, did you want to come in there? And then I think I will.
Yeah, I was, Mike, you mentioned the minefield that you're walking around in, and I saw that, Kari, you were laughing, and I think probably on your side of the water, it has become a growing issue, but it's or a big issue, but it's I would say I can see that tendency all over the place. I just wrote a Christmas song for New Zealand, and I had to cut the word ho when Santa Claus can't say ho anymore, because it also means a female prostitute. So I had to change that so Santa Claus needs to say something else, you know. And a few years ago, I published. I rewrote a score, All Creatures of Our God and King, which is in the British Book of Hymns, written 800 years ago by Saint Francis, and you would say that it's sort of legit in a way, but my publisher said that it will be difficult for us to publish this in the US, because when you say all creatures of our God and King, you're actually giving the God a gender, which is not okay. We have to avoid that. And so it has to be a neutral kind of, but I can't change the words of Saint Francis. And it's in your Book of Hymns, at least for many of the Americans. Can we make an exception, you know? So they went back and forth, and they finally said that, okay, yeah, we can publish this 800-year-old piece once again. But the concerns are genuine in a way, and they serve a greater matter, which I totally agree with. But sometimes the means or the way people try to interpret the rules and things are, to me, a bit confusing. And I think sometimes one of the topics of this seminar is engagement. And if we're going to engage people to listen to, as Mike also said in the beginning, text, what makes vocal music unique? Yeah, we can actually deliver text. No symphony orchestra in the world can do that, or jazz band, but we do as singers. So it also makes us vulnerable to these types of, they're not attacks, but they're trying to compartmentalize choral music into something that is totally acceptable by any person in this world. It won't work. It needs to stick out. It needs to do things that are even provocative, or and so. And it's easier for me to say, because I don't get my fundings from somewhere else, so I can be that person. But I definitely sympathize with you who need to have this as a constantly running challenge, basically. But keep on taking it.
Lorenzo, can I ask you, is this something, when you think about the text that you set in your choral writing, what kind of consideration do you give to sourcing the text or the themes contained within that text?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. yeah, the text is very important for the composer. I want only to give one very short comment about this discussion about female or male composer. I think music is without gender. I think now it's not simple because we live in a period when it's important to think about the gender, but also the first things is we need to choose music in relation of the quality of the music and the quality of the project. I think it's very important to give help to some part of the community of composer, because sometimes young people have no space, sometimes old people have no space, and for female conductors and female composers sometimes it's very difficult to have space, because especially in Europe is a male all the best position of the not choral music but the culture is by men, and I think it's very important to give to give light to the production of the female composers, but also we need to choose good music, and sometimes we know our production now is a very large production of new music, but maybe only 1 or 2% of this production can be continued to sing in the future, and sometimes we perform not very interesting music, but this is our job. Sometimes it's more simple to choose Brahms or Palestrina or Monteverdi because the history choose for us, and sometimes we need to help young composer, young men, young girls, to develop the quality of the composing, the composition technique, to hope to have a new Debussy or a new Schumann, but sometimes we are not ready to judge or to understand. I think it's very important the role of the conductors or for like Anders, the role of the position of these people when we decide in which way we want to go for our activities, because we give space and experience to some part of the choral composers, some part of this group of composers, and sometimes we decide this yes, this no, and this is our responsibility, and it's not so simple. Respect the text. I like very much the new opportunities of composers, because now the new composition sometimes don't use only one text, but the composer can put different texts together, like in the past the Requiem by Brahms, but like a lot of music, the composer now is not only not take only one text, and the composition is not only one text, but sometimes the composer can choose one verse to one text, a part of a poems, and we can mix different texts, and this is very interesting for the projects of the composers, because the composer now is not only a musician but needs to be also cultural, and you need to be connected with the cultural world, and this is very interesting because we can organize with the conductors or with the artistic director some important and different and new vision of the communication of the music, because sometimes when we choose only one poems, we give the color only of this. But this is very beautiful. It's the start, the history of the composition from Josquin des Prés until now. But in this last 50 years, we can add different texts. For example, Randall Stroop or other composer, they mix Latin text and English, or maybe two different languages, the same text in two different languages, or maybe two very different texts connected by the music. I think this is very interesting, and this gives to the composer a large opportunities to open the mind and help to open the mind of also of the singers and the audience.
Great, thank you, Lorenzo. I'm conscious of time. I know we're only running till 11:30. I know, Kari, you've got to go and do a workshop at the Ulster University Chamber Choir shortly, that anybody's welcome to attend. I was wondering, and Fiona thankfully has reminded me, if there's any questions that anybody would like to pose to the panel before we wrap up. Don't know if there's been any, Fiona, that you wish to flag. If not, I just have maybe a question. A few of you mentioned gender in your previous answer, and something that some of our students have been interested in recently is looking at choirs with respect to gender and transgender and non-binary membership of choirs, and how to address any issues that might be a barrier to entry for people joining choirs. I don't know. A few people have your hands up, which is great. Bernie, I think you've got something.
Yes, I'll be very short. Actually, we have to move away from female male, just as we were having this discussion about female composers. We really have to say upper voices, lower voices. We can't say men, women, and female, and that's just because now it's a different world, and we need to be sensitive to people's individual situations. And I have found that I have myself had difficulty with that at some stages, and I'm working on it, because it is hard to get used to, but it's extremely important that we do that.
Great, thank you, Mike. Mike, you had a...
Yeah, we actually eliminated men and women in our ensembles. We call them just by the Oriana or Apollo. Other groups in the States in particular have done so. I have a hard time with men's and women's sectionals, so I call them SA or TB sectionals as best I can, but definitely in the States. And I do have I had transgender students in my ensembles. And that becomes another discussion for another time about how to place those voices within the ensemble, dependent upon their assigned sex at birth and whether or not they have gone through transition or not. So that's a longer, bigger topic.
It is, of course. And Kari, maybe you want to come in there.
Yeah, just quickly, as Joe Michael there said, there are very big and difficult issues here, but there's some low-hanging fruit that I think we should all grasp. One is the language, that you use gender-neutral language, because it normally doesn't make any difference. Back row is the same as tenors and basses before, or tenors and basses, independent of who is singing those parts. And the other one is considering concert dress, so that everyone can feel comfortable on stage. I mean, those things are just they're signals that you're not indifferent to people's lives, and so I think make sure that you at least grasp the low-hanging fruit very quickly, and then the bigger discussions will go on in the choir and its administration.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much. There's a lot to ponder and a lot to think about, and so many bigger discussions to be had in the future, I'm sure. As I say, we're at 11:30 now, so I'd like to pass back to Donal. He will wrap things up for us here. Donal, are you there?
I am. Rob, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for a fascinating discussion. The time has absolutely flown. And I love when a discussion ends with prompting many further questions and deeper topics to be explored at a further time. I'll just there's so many takeaways from this. So the image of the quilt as opposed to the melting pot, I absolutely love. I'm going to put on order Anders' books on family/choir book. That's on order now. And to everyone, I'm really looking forward, and the city and the festival is very lucky to look forward to welcoming all of you in person over the next 5 days. On behalf of City of Derry International Choir Festival 2023, thank you so much, everyone, and let's continue the celebration. See you all soon.
Bye-bye.